Hi, this is Rachel with Fiona Sandwich Patterns, and in this video we're going to be putting together the Mount Rainier block. I have had lots and lots of requests for this pattern, so I'm really thrilled that this one finally came together. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer for patterns to come together, and we finally have it. It's been a couple of videos since I have talked about fabric selection and kind of what I look for in choosing a fabric. So what I really wanted with this, the inspiration picture for this were kind of some rolling hills in front of Mount Rainier, which was in the background, and then this pine tree that was standing all by itself. So we have a few different things that become the focal area, and I really wanted this in my inspiration photo. There was a field of wildflowers, and then in just about every photo that I found of Mount Rainier, there's always snow. But this is your world, so you decide if there is snow on Mount Rainier or if there is, if there's not, if it's just going to be rocky. So I knew that I wanted these two areas to be a focal area, and then I needed something to kind of tie it in. I didn't want there to be a huge jump. So since these two have a lot going on in them, I wanted to have something that really did not have a lot going on, but because of the tree in this composition, the tree goes up and then your eye looks to this because there's a lot of detail. So I chose to have these two areas have a lot of detail, and then these kind of fade into the background. And I chose to have this hill and this hill be different colors so that they just kind of stood out from each other. And as you were looking at a landscape, generally the darker colors are in the front and then they become muted as you move farther back. And this, because they were just right next to each other, it didn't really matter. So you can decide if you want them to be hills that are farther away from each other or hills that are closer together. Also, as things go back, they not only become more muted, they become more shades of blue. So sometimes that's why mountains look so blue, is because they're just farther back in the landscape. So as you're looking at pictures and as you're looking at nature, really start to notice that the colors are not really what you see that they are. Shadows are not really gray, but they are purples and they're greens. And start to notice, you know, the colors of the mountains, that they're not really brown, they're purple or they're blue or they're green. So then you can start to pull those sorts of fabrics from your collection and you can start to use them. This is really a bold fabric. I absolutely love it. I probably will not use it in too many other patterns because it really is so super bold. But it was great. I really wanted something that was really lively. The other thing that I look for with my fabric is I look for something that is loose. I don't look for something that is really tight. So I have this really pretty calico, and it has really a definite pattern. It's very tight, it's very precise. Here's another one that this is, obviously you wouldn't use these in here, but this becomes, this is very suggestive. You can read this or you can see this and say, oh, that's definitely a field of wildflowers, but you would look at this and you'd say, huh, I don't exactly know what I'm looking at in the front. Is that, I don't, you know, your mind just doesn't know what to do with it. So a confused mind always says no, it always moves on. So it just would have a really a huge disconnect, and your brain just really wouldn't know what to do with it. So it just would be kind of an unpleasing composition. So, you know, you could use something like this, but I would probably be more picky with where I would use it, and I would maybe try to, you know, fussy cut some things. Maybe I just really want this flower to stand out and I have something really small. So I keep these because I like the color, but I try not to use them too terribly much with my national park patterns because they are just so tight and they're not really loose and suggestive. When I look at fabrics, I want to know what's going on in this little area and can it look as something else. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind. And in fact, this piece, I don't know if you can see, I don't think so, I kind of had to position the template so that I just got this color because there was a lot of other stuff going on inside of the fabric. So don't be afraid to do that. So then you can see in this block, this is my foundation paper piece, which we'll be sewing together. I put this together kind of in, you know, a different sort of way. I really loved this purple fabric, and I wanted to use it instead of this one. I like to kind of change things up. I get bored really easily, and so I wanted something really different. And for the hill back here, I used some pine trees and I turned it on its side, so it doesn't read as much as pine trees, but it really gives the impression of the sunlight moving. And because I don't like to do the same thing twice, I wanted to change it up, and I thought, you know, this really gives the suggestion of rocks, even though it's very much burlap. But when you have it all together, it gives the suggestion of something else. And then for the tree, I really wanted to emphasize the height of it. So again, I chose this as my focal area, but then this kind of stands out a little bit more than this, but they mirror each other in kind of the line striation effect. So then it just kind of plays together really nicely and harmoniously. All right, so let's get to sewing these together. For the sake of time, I have trimmed these, and I'm going to trim this one with you. So my word of caution that I have in every video is check your ruler to make sure that all four sides of your ruler have 1/4 of an inch marking. And on one side of my ruler is not exactly 1/4 of an inch. It is, but you have to move it and it just becomes a lot harder to use. So I always use the same side of my ruler, and I have little grippies. I think these are linked in my essentials blog post, so if you need some grips, definitely check that out. So I line up the 1/4 of an inch marking on my ruler on top of the outside sew line. I do not pay any attention to the cut line. Sometimes printers don't cut things quite the way that we want, or they don't print things, they don't cut things, goodness. They don't print things quite the way that we want them to. Sometimes the ink bleeds a little bit more. So after many years of struggling to try to figure out how do I get these to line up really nicely, I discovered that if I use the 1/4 of an inch marking on top of my ruler and I set that right in the middle of the sew line, I will get a really nice straight edge, and then I can line that up. I just repeat that for all of the templates, and I get a really nice straight edge, and then things come together the way that I want them to. So the other thing, if you have not watched any of my previous videos, I use glue. I have a very minor obsession with glue, and I call it that I'm a kindergartner. I love my paper and my glue stick. So the only way that you will be able to lift up your template and trim the corners with scissors is if you use glue. So I use just a little bit of glue stick on the big pieces, on my last piece and on my first piece. And generally I don't need it, you know, this one I might use a little bit, but I think it's going to be okay. So definitely on the first piece and the last piece, you will want to put a little bit of glue down to hold your templates, and you can do all of your trimming and cutting. Okay, so we have A and C will go together first. And I'm always looking for a few different things. I want to know what is going on the inside of the block. Is there anything that is really important to make sure that things line up? And this one really doesn't. The hill has kind of a gentle slope. So then the next thing that I'm going to focus on is making sure that the outside of the block matches as best as I can. And if you are brand new, it just takes a little bit of back and forth, and my preferred method is to have my fingers along the sew line, and then I just lift up and down with my opposite hand. So I put my non-dominant hand down, and then I move the template with my dominant hand. And then we're going to sew a little bit before to a little bit after the line. And my presser foot is in the center of the sew line. My stitches are at about 1.6 millimeters, between 1.5 and 1.6 is really good. If you have a vintage sewing machine, probably about between 20 and 30 stitches per inch is good. You don't want teeny tiny, and you don't want really big. And then I remove the papers on the seam allowance. This is a pretty fast sew, so it's not going to take too long for us to get this put together. And I like to press my seams open, especially when we have lots of little pieces that are coming together. I'm almost always tempted to, with one piece that is really much larger over here, I'm always tempted to put press to one side, and then I almost always regret it. So we'll just press them open. So I know there's a lot more going on between these two, so kind of line up the outside of the templates, and then put your fingers where you know that there's something going to be really important to line up. And I can see that I'm off. So, and I was off in my sewing. So that means that my block is going to be off. Let's see how much my block is going to be off. Maybe not too much. It becomes really imperative, and I don't always follow my rules, but it's really imperative to make sure that your stitches are on top of the sew line, especially when you come to kind of an intersection or a junction of where you have 2 or 3 sew lines. This is a really important place, and I should have paid more attention, but it's a really good lesson for everybody to learn. And absolutely nobody is perfect, so we're just going to make this come together as best as we can. So I'm off by about 1/8 of an inch, so that means probably the rest of my block is going to be off by 1/8. So I think if I was not recording a video, if this was my personal block, what I would do is I would probably remove part of this seam, and I would remove part of this seam, and I would just re-sew those, then I would re-sew this. One thing, if you do need to re-sew anything, if you need to remove anything to re-sew, I recommend starching. Turn it over, starch it really, really well. Press your seams so that they are flat. Give it a good starch. I would resume sewing. The starch is going to help hold that down. I would also give some glue to these places so then it holds it in place.